Chapter 1, Part 2. Could Uncle Barbossen have killed his own brother? Doubtful, Will concluded. His great-uncle was antisocial, but he never seemed dangerous. Just an old man who minded his own business and would thank you to do the same. He did remember the brothers talking in hushed voices at Grandma Eleanor's funeral, however. That was unusual, but hardly reason to worry. As the eulogy finished, Will began to think his imagination got the better of him. Maybe Grandpa Connor hadn't been murdered. Maybe it really was just an accident. Or maybe there was more to it than Will knew. After the service, people lingered. No one seemed ready to leave Connor's side, so they stayed and talked to each other, despite the brisk chill nipping at their skin. Will didn't expect his family to stick around. Mourning alongside strangers might be comforting to some, but not to the Lewises. Will's father pulled him aside. "Son," he said, "your mother and I need to speak to your uncle. Would you be all right for a few minutes on your own?" Will knew that tone. It was a "don't argue with me" tone. The way he said it wasn't mean, but it was adamant. Will nodded, and his parents left a trail in the snow, leading to the mausoleum Barbossen had claimed. The old man sized them up as they approached. Not wanting to intrude, Will took a stroll down the cemetery path. His eyes idly read the names on headstones while his mind continued to question the newest resident of Hazel Ridge. In his lack of attention, Will walked right into somebody. They both staggered to keep their feet on the ground. "Oh, I'm sorry," Will said. His arms flailed as he tried to keep his balance.
"It's fine,"
said a girl's voice. When Will looked up, he almost did lose his footing. The girl he bumped into had to be around his age, give or take a year. It took a single glance for Will's heart to speed up a notch. The girl's red hair was silky and smooth, flowing from her winter hat to below her shoulders. She had a kind of carefree youthfulness that shined through her face. When she met his gaze, Will blushed. Those eyes were such a brilliant shade of green, they almost sparkled. She was the prettiest girl Will ever met. He forced his eyes away. Will was embarrassed enough for bumping into her. He didn't need to make it worse by staring. But when silence followed, the girl started to walk away. Are you here for the funeral?" Will blurted out. It sounded stupid, but he had to say something. He didn't want her to leave yet. She turned towards Will.
"Yeah, my dad knew him and wanted to pay his respects.
She smiled.
He dragged me along."
Will laughed. It came out a higher pitch than he hoped.
"How did you know Dr. Ammon?"
the girl asked. In the distance, Will noticed his parents talking to Barbossen. It didn't look friendly. "He was my grandpa," said Will.
"Oh wow, I'm sorry,"
she said. The girl examined him more closely.
"Do you live around here? I don't recognize you."
Will suddenly wished he was from the area. Suddenly Elkhorn was much more appealing. "I live in Beloit, actually. It's about a half-hour drive." It was a struggle to sound casual. Will thought his heart had taken on life of its own, beating at such a frantic pace. He couldn't remember when he last had feeling in his legs. The girl, on the other hand, seemed perfectly at ease.
Ah, that explains it. I've got connections around here, but you're outside of my reach.
She smiled and held out a gloved hand.
My name's Eliza.
Will felt queasy as they shook hands. Captivated by her smile, he momentarily forgot how to speak. The memory returned with a crash, and finally he understood he had to introduce himself too. I'm Will, he said at last. Will Lewis.
Well, nice to meet you, Will,
said Eliza.
I should probably find my dad before he thinks I'm avoiding the funeral.
Yeah, I need to get back to my parents too. Will tried not to sound disappointed. He was in no hurry to see her go. Eliza winked.
Who knows? Maybe we'll see each other next time you're in town.
With Grandpa Connor gone, Will didn't see any occasion to return to Elkhorn. He made a mental note to think of excuses to come back, just for the chance to cross paths again. Eliza waved and headed off towards the canopy, where the number of people finally started to diminish. For the first time all day, Will's mind wasn't on his grandfather's death. In fact, he was quite proud of himself. He talked to a pretty girl and didn't make a complete fool of himself. Well, aside from blindly running into her and nearly knocking them both over. He would probably never see her again, but his mood had certainly improved. Within minutes, that would change again. Will strolled down the paths, using his memory like a video. It rewound to meeting Eliza, paused at every smile, then replayed the scene over and over. His knees still felt a little shaky, but at least his pulse stopped its crazy tap dance. Just as Will pictured that last playful wink, there was a commotion by the canopy. Will rushed back. The sight coming into view shocked him. It was his father, fist clenched around Barbassan's collar, pinning the old man to the mausoleum. Only a handful of visitors remained, but they rushed to break up the confrontation. Will's mother buried her face in her hands, the tears flowing at last. "What the devil is going on here?" said the clergy. "This is a funeral!" Mr. Lewis and Barbassan were motionless, their eyes locked with laser focus. "Would you kindly put that man down?" the clergy pleaded. Slowly, Barbassan slid down the stone wall. Even as Mr. Lewis released his grip, he didn't break his gaze. Through her tears, Mrs. Lewis managed to smile at her son. "Come on, hon. I think it's time to go," she said, leading Will back to the car. Mr. Lewis finally turned from Barbassan to follow his wife. "Your father ain't no saint, Cass!" Barbassan yelled after them. His voice was gruff, like an old dog's bark. The words sent a chill down Will's spine. His mother cried. His father walked briskly, jaw clenched. Will glanced over his shoulder. Barbassan's eyes followed them with unnerving intensity. When he was safely in the car, Will realized he was holding his breath. He let out a sigh of relief and was glad to leave the gates of Hazel Ridge Cemetery.